Charles Darwin penned these astounding words in 1871. He said, "At some future point, the civilized races of man will almost certainly exterminate and replace the savage races." Now wait, stop right there. Who exactly are the savage races? Darwin was clear on this. He said the Australian Aborigines, African blacks, Mongolians, Native Americans, South Americans, Polynesians, and Eskimos were all savage races. Who were the civilized races then, you may ask? Well, you guessed it. Darwin asserted that white people were at the head of the line. Specifically, he said Europeans, who were reckoned superior to all so-called savages. Now, all you wokesters out there, listen up. Darwin has done more to plant the idea of white supremacy and racism in the mind of school children and adults than any other person on Earth. The well-known evolutionist Stephen Jay Gould said, "Biological arguments for racism may have been common before 1859, but they increased by orders of magnitude following the acceptance of Darwin's evolutionary theory," end quote. Now that is one quite inconvenient truth. What brought about acceptance of Darwin's theory was his dressing it up as seemingly scientific. He dressed it up in scientific garb. The so-called science of his survival of the fittest idea requires that some people are more fit to live than others. That's how natural selection works. The full title of his most famous book spelled it out: The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. 12 years later, in The Descent of Man, Darwin made it clear that whites were more favored ones, being more fit. He believed blacks were more closely related to apes than whites were. Darwin said that it was an ignorant thing to allow the less fit humans to propagate. Darwin actually believed that allowing weak members of any society to propagate, quote, must be highly injurious to the race of man, end quote. He said, excepting in the case of man himself, hardly anyone is so ignorant as to allow his worst animals to breed. Now, that's where Darwin's cousin Francis Galton came in. He coined the word eugenics from the Greek meaning well-born. That's something the savage races clearly were not. The Nazis are famous for applying eugenics to Jews. Hitler killed 6 million of them. But don't think that eugenics is a thing of the past. If you can't kill them, you have to find another way to stop so-called unfit from propagating. This was left to Margaret Sanger to figure out this one, which she certainly did. She implemented her plan through an organization now called Planned Parenthood. Sanger was an outspoken eugenicist who saw birth control as a means for, quote, the gradual suppression, elimination, and eventual extirpation of defective stocks, those human weeds which threaten the blooming of the finest flowers in American civilization, unquote. Come on now, come on. If we're going to cancel Washington, Jefferson, and many others for owning blacks as slaves, how can we not cancel Darwin for suggesting and Sanger for acting to eliminate any so-called human reeds or defective stock deemed unfit for the garden? How could we not do this? Well, people who defend Darwin are quick to point out that he opposed slavery. Well, some people are opposed to owning exotic animals. Does that mean that such people think exotic animals are human? No. The fact is, you can be opposed to slavery and still think blacks are inferior to whites, as the case with Darwin. Now, trying to dance around Darwin fails because the ultimate test is, what's the fruit that came from the seeds that he planted? The fruit of his bad seed are millions of human beings being killed by their own governments. You see, it was not only Hitler who acted on Darwin's diabolic ideas, but Lenin, Stalin, Mao Zedong, and Karl Marx was behind them all. He was no secret admirer of Darwin, and he was a blatant racist himself. It's time to expose Darwin for the white supremacist and racist that he was, and bury his demonic favored races idea that continues to be propagated from the grave through Darwin's own pen. I'm calling on all wokesters to dethrone King Darwin. If you're a student, I call on you to expose Darwin for who he really was, a white supremacist and racist. Protest in your school, non-violently, of course, but protest nonetheless. After Darwin's dethroned, take on Karl Marx. If you're a real activist, a principled activist, get active about this. If you can't get woked up about this, don't call yourself an anti-racist. I'm Kevin McGary. I'm the author of Woked Up, finally putting an axe to the taproot of white supremacy and racism in America. I'm also the founder of Every Black Life Matters. We provide anti-racist training like you've never heard before. For more information, please go to everyblm.com. That's everyblm.com.